Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we're jumping straight into really just one incredibly dramatic chapter from ancient history. We're looking at Judges chapter 7.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. It paints this picture, right? You've got this absolutely massive enemy force, the Midianites and their allies.
And the description is so vivid. It says they're thick as locusts and they're camels. Well, like sand on the seashore, just countless.
Exactly, numberless. They're camped out in the valley, this huge presence. And facing them, a much smaller Israelite group led by Gideon, and frankly, they seem pretty hesitant, at least initially.
So the big question for our deep dive today is, how does this tiny, seemingly completely outmatched group pull off a victory against these impossible odds?
Right. And what does this specific story, this way of winning, tell us about maybe where real strength lies, or what victory even looks like when the usual rules just don't apply?
Okay, so Gideon has managed to gather a decent force to start with, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. The text mentions 32,000 men. He's got them gathered near the spring of Herod, sort of readying themselves to face this immense army just down in the valley.
But even with 32,000, you look down at that valley teeming with Midianites. It must have been incredibly daunting.
Oh, absolutely. Anyone could see the scale difference was terrifying.
Right, which makes the first divine instructions so utterly baffling. You've got 32,000 men, you're facing an enemy compared to locusts and sand, and the message Gideon gets is, you have too many men.
Too many. It just flies in the face of any kind of military logic, doesn't it? You'd think you'd meet every single person you could get.
Exactly. But the text gives a very specific reason why.
It does. It says explicitly it's so Israel can't later claim, our own strength saved us. The whole point seems to be making it crystal clear that the victory belongs to God, not to human power or numbers.
Okay, that rationale is key for everything that follows. So the first cut happens. Gideon's told to announce that anyone who's afraid, anyone trembling, can just go home. Leave from Mount Gilead.
And the result is pretty staggering.
Yeah.
22,000 men pack up and leave.
22,000, that's what, more than two-thirds of his army gone in an instant just based on fear?
Gone. Leaving him with 10,000. Now, 10,000 is still, a respectable number of soldiers in many contexts.
Sure, but compared to sand on the seashore, it still feels incredibly small, right? You're still massively outnumbered.
Massively. But according to the narrative, even 10,000 was still too many for the kind of victory God intended.
Which brings us to the second test, and this one feels even stranger, almost random. The remaining 10,000 are taken down to the water.
Yeah, to be sifted, as the text puts it, and the selection method. It's all about how they drink water.
Which seems bizarre. What does drinking water have to do with fighting ability?
It's puzzling from a practical standpoint. The instruction is to watch them. Some guys kneel down, put their faces right into the water to drink.
Okay.
Others don't kneel fully. They scoop water up with their hands and lap it, bringing it to their mouths. The text specifically says, like a dog laps.
Like a dog laps. Okay, so two distinct groups based on drinking style.
Right. And the numbers break down dramatically again. Only 300 men lap the water using their hands.
Only 300 out of 10,000.
Yeah. The vast majority, 9,700, knelt down to drink directly.
Wow. And then comes the decision.
The decision. The Lord tells Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped you, guy, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home.
So the 9,700 who knelt down are sent away too. They apparently hand over their supplies and their trumpets to the 300, but the actual fighting force is now just 300 men.
300.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second. You, listening, just think about this. You start with 32,000. You're facing an enemy that fills a valley. And you're told to shrink your army, first based on fear, then based on, well, how they drink water, down to 300. What does that process prioritize? It's clearly not military might or experience in the conventional sense.
No, it seems to prioritize something else entirely. Maybe obedience. Maybe a willingness to trust a completely illogical process. It actively removes any basis for human confidence in numbers.
Right, so Gideon's left with his tiny band of 300. They've got the provisions, they've got the trumpets from the others who left, and below them this enormous Midianite camp is completely oblivious to how drastically the odds have just shifted, in a way.
Yeah, they have no idea the force opposing them is now so minuscule. And that night, after the reduction, Gideon gets his next instruction.
The Lord tells him, basically, go down against the camp now. I am giving it into your hands. It's stated as a certainty. The victory is already guaranteed.
It is, but there's also this understanding of Gideon's likely state of mind. I mean, who wouldn't be terrified?
Absolutely, facing that with 300 men.
So the Lord offers him a way to boost his confidence, a sort of reassurance. He says, if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. It's like, go get some intel, but it's intel designed to bolster your faith.
So Gideon does it. He takes Purah, and they sneak down towards the edge of this vast enemy encampment in the dark. Imagine creeping closer, hearing the sounds, maybe smelling the campfires, knowing you're surrounded by, well, locusts and sand.
Must have been incredibly tense. And right there, at the fringes, they overhear something crucial. A Midianite soldier is telling his buddy about a dream he had.
A dream. What was it?
It sounds almost comical, actually. He dreamed about a loaf of barley bread. Just a round loaf of barley bread tumbling down into the Midianite camp.
Barley bread. Okay, not exactly a terrifying image.
Not on its own, no. But in the dream, this humble barley loaf hits a tent. Maybe the main command tent, it's not specified, but an important one. It strikes it with such force that the tent just overturns and collapses flat.
Huh, weird dream. But it's the interpretation that matters, right?
Exactly. The friend he's telling it to immediately understands it. No hesitation. He says, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands.
Wow. So the Midianites themselves are interpreting their own dream as predicting their defeat, specifically by Gideon, enabled by God.
Right. Gideon overhears the enemy confirming the very promise God just gave him. Talk about powerful encouragement. It comes directly from the source of his fear. And the text says Gideon's reaction is immediate. He hears this, and he worships God right then and there.
You can almost feel the fear lifting and the conviction settling in. So, completely energized by this, Gideon heads back up to his tiny camp.
And his message is clear. Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. The doubt is gone. It's time for action.
And the plan of action is just as unconventional as everything else we've seen.
Totally. He divides the 300 men into 3 companies, 100 men each, and their equipment for this initial phase. Not swords and shields primarily, it's trumpets.
Okay.
Empty clay jars.
Empty jars.
And torches hidden inside the jars.
Trumpets, jars, and hidden torches. This is not your standard military assault plan.
Not even close. Gideon's instructions are simple. Watch me, he says, follow my lead. When he and his group get to the edge of the camp and blow their trumpets and break the jars, everyone else in their positions surrounding the camp has to do the same thing and shout.
What were they supposed to shout initially?
The instruction was for the Lord and for Gideon.
Okay, so the plan is set.
Right. Gideon leads his 100 men down. They time it perfectly. The text mentions it's the beginning of the middle watch, just after they changed the guards. Maybe a moment of less alertness.
Smart timing. And then
they reach the edge of the camp. And on Gideon's signal, they simultaneously blow the trumpets and smash the clay jars.
Imagine the sound. 300 trumpets blasting suddenly in the night, mixed with the sharp shattering of 300 pottery jars.
And instantly, as the jars break, the torches inside are revealed. So you have this sudden, startling cacophony of sound and bursts of light appearing all around the perimeter of this massive sleeping camp.
And the other 2 companies followed suit immediately.
Yes, all 3 companies did it together, holding the torches high in their left hands, keeping the trumpets in their right, ready to blow again if needed. And they yelled.
And what did they actually shout in the moment?
Interestingly, the text records their shout as, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. They added the word sword, emphasizing the attack, the battle cry.
A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. So, noise, light, shouting from all sides. What was the effect inside the Midianite camp?
Pure chaos. Absolute panic. The text says the Midianites started running, shouting, crying out in confusion. They were completely disoriented.
And crucially, Gideon's 300 men didn't actually charge in initially, did they? They just held their positions.
That's right. They held their positions around the camp, maintaining the noise and the light. The victory wasn't won by them physically overpowering the enemy.
So how did the Midianites get defeated?
Here's the core of it, according to the source. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn their swords against each other.
They turned on themselves.
Yes. In the panic and confusion, likely thinking they were being attacked from all sides by a huge force, they started fighting amongst themselves. The huge army essentially destroyed itself from within. They routed and fled in total disarray.
An incredible outcome. So the enemy is fleeing, defeated by their own swords through this divinely orchestrated panic. What happens next?
The pursuit phase begins. Now that the main threat is broken, calls go out to the Israelites in the nearby tribal territories Naphtali, Asher, Manasseh to come and chase down the fleeing Midianites.
Makes sense. Don't let them regroup.
Exactly. And Gideon also sends messengers racing ahead to the hill country of Ephraim with a specific mission. Get to the Jordan River crossings before the Midianites do, cut off their escape route.
Did the Ephraimites manage it?
They did. The text says the men of Ephraim captured the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, all the way to a place called Beth-Bera.
Hmm.
And in doing so, they caught two key Midianite leaders,
Oh, who were they?
Oreb and Zeb. They're captured and killed at specific locations named after them, the Rock of Oreb and the winepress of Zeb. And as proof of their success, the Ephraimites bring the heads of Oreb and Zeb back to Gideon, who was by the Jordan, a decisive end to their leadership.
So let's try and wrap this up. We started with what looked like an impossible military situation.
Utterly impossible by human standards.
Then we saw these two really radical reductions in the Israelite force, dictated by God based on criteria like fear and, well, drinking style.
Yeah, completely counterintuitive selection.
Then Gideon gets this amazing, unexpected encouragement by overhearing the enemy basically predict their own defeat.
Confirmation right when he needed it.
And the final victory comes not through fighting prowess, but through this incredibly unconventional strategy noise, light, jars, trumpets, that the source says God used to make the enemy defeat themselves.
Exactly. It consistently highlights that the power wasn't in the numbers, wasn't in the weapons in the usual sense. It was in obedience to a plan that made no logical sense, and the divine intervention that made that plan work in a devastating way for the enemy. It removes any ground for human boasting.
It really pushes you to think differently about where strength actually comes from, especially when you feel completely overwhelmed. It wasn't about matching the enemy's apparent strength at all.
Not in the slightest. It suggests that true strength, or at least the path to overcoming impossible odds in this narrative, might lie in trusting a process that defies conventional wisdom. It might involve leaning into vulnerability or dependence rather than trying to muster more inadequate human power.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. If you're facing something that feels absolutely insurmountable, like that Midianite army filling the valley, what might it look like to question the conventional ways of tackling it? Could there be strength or a solution hidden in an approach that seems illogical, counterintuitive, or requires a level of trust that feels, well, a bit scary?